this has brought us together in new ways, and in ways that I hope makes Skoll Week so much more accessible to so many more people. And because we're gathering virtually, it's mean that all these events are open to the public. And so we're getting hundreds and hundreds of new people every session that maybe haven't been to a forum before, um, uh, or wouldn't be able to make it, but are obviously still deeply engaged in the work of trying to shift systems to make things a little bit better, and to make a difference on issues that they care about. So this has really opened up the community in some really important and meaningful ways, and I hope that we can continue that effort today. I'm really pleased to kick off this session, which is the second in a series of two about leading through disruption. And this is a series that it's an idea that we've been discussing with our friends at the Presencing Institute for some time. And we're actually thinking about putting together a more intensive in-person program later on in the year. And then obviously we all experienced a pretty significant disruption over the last couple of months with the COVID-19 pandemic, and thought this would be an opportunity to share some of these ideas and to start building community around what are the kinds of skills and attributes and qualities and practices that that are going to help all of us to drive meaningful change at times of great uncertainty, unpredictability, and disruption. And we came together on Monday, and with Martin and Becky, who I'll introduce in a moment, talked about kind of the core software, the core kinds of skills and attributes and practices that can really help. And today we're going to move forward a little bit and build out the framework from Theory U. And many of you are probably familiar with Theory U, developed by Otto Scharmer and many others, and Presencing Institute is sort of part of that same ecosystem. We think this is a terrific approach, and that it's relevant not only in our current moment, but in general in the 21st century, in the sense that I think this pandemic is a dress rehearsal for some of the other big grand challenges that are all collective action problems that we're going to have to face down together, climate change being the most notable of them. So we're excited, and we're going to try to do what we can to make this session as interactive as possible. Most of you I see are muted. You're welcome to have your video on so that we can see you, but if bandwidth is a concern, obviously leave them off. You can communicate through the chats. You can also communicate by doing the kind of raised hands function. And there will be times when we'll be breaking out into small groups and actually asking you to speak up, and you can turn yourself off mute by clicking the little mute icon, or you can hold down your space bar and talk to temporarily unmute. We're all becoming experts at Zoom, but I thought going through the ground rules would be useful. One thing to note is that nobody on this chat or in this meeting has access to screen sharing, and that's just to prevent Zoom bombing, which if you haven't experienced it, you may, and you've certainly kind of heard about. So that's just to keep the meeting on track. So with that, I want to introduce our facilitators today, and I'll turn it over then to them and let them tell you more about it. For those who were here on Monday, you already got to meet both of them. First off is Martin Kalunga-Banda. Martin is a faculty at the Presencing Institute and also a visiting fellow here at the Skoll Center in Oxford. Martin's a consultant in organization and leadership development. He's a facilitator of innovation and change. He's a coach. He's an author. He's written some terrific books, including Leading Like Madiba, Lessons from Mandela, which is not his newest book, but one of my favorites. Martin's been an advisor to governments and to presidents. He has done some of the most highly rated sessions that we've ever had for our students here in Oxford, and brings just a terrific breadth of experience and insight to the work. And Martin is going to be joined by Becky Buell, and Becky is also part of the Presencing Institute. She's an experienced executive who's been at this for over 25 years, working both in the not-for-profit sector and also in the private sector. Her expertise includes strategy, organizational development, and business planning. And she has been a practitioner with the Presencing Institute for a long time, and is also currently a board member. And she has a CV that's also, accomplishments that are TNTC, as we say in medicine, too numerous to count. So I'll leave that off because I think it's in the session description. But they're phenomenal people. We're really grateful that they've given us our time today, and I'm pleased to turn things over to Martin and Becky.
Peter, thank you once again for the generous introduction, and welcome everyone to this workshop or space for thinking and learning together. Without much ado, I would like to invite Becky to set us off on this journey, and please contribute as much as you feel invited to. Thank you. Becky.
Great, thank you, Martin, and hello, everyone. You know, as Peter was saying, I think one of the, people are talking about what opportunities come out of the crisis, and one of them is this whole issue about access, the ability for, 190 people from all over the world to be together for an hour and a half is just an amazing accomplishment, and really I find very exciting and enriching. So, really nice to be with everyone here today on this online session. As Peter said, this is the second in a two-part program on the theme of leading in times of disruption. Welcome back to those of you who were with us on Monday, and we'll try and bring some of the insights from that session for those of you who weren't there. Just for those of you who don't know, the Presencing Institute, we're an action research institute founded by faculty at MIT. We're committed to advancing research and practice around what we call awareness-based systems change. This is based on the work of Otto Scharmer and Theory U, which I think some of you will be familiar with. And Theory U really brings together the disciplines of systems thinking, action research, and awareness building and mindfulness. So today we're really happy to have the opportunity to share some of these frameworks with you, and as they apply to leading in disruptive times. So on Monday, we shared some thoughts on how we deepen our understanding of complex systems, and Martin and I introduced a few frameworks for how we respond in times of disruption. We looked at patterns and responses that are, on the one hand, closed, reactive, based on fear, versus responses that are open, compassionate, and generative. And Martin will bring some of that back in today. And then we wanted to offer some examples of how we've applied this in practice, so that we get some sort of tangible examples into the mix. So we wanted to start really with hearing from you, and I'm assuming here that there's some people here who were here on Monday. So if not, we'll open it up more widely. But I wanted to start by asking some of the people who were here on Monday if they wanted to maybe share with those who are joining us what your reflections have been, or any insights that you kind of felt you took away from the first session. So I'll put a little a question here in the chat, which is what reflections or insights do you have on how leaders need to respond in the face of disruption? And if people who were there on Monday want to share some things that maybe you walked away with or occurred to you on Monday night or Tuesday from the session, you can put those in the chat. If you are new to this and just want to share your thoughts on that, we also welcome you to put any reflections in the chat so that people can share their thinking. So we've got responding to speed with speed only increases the spinning of the hamster wheel. I think that was Martin. Needs to be more trust. We introduced something called the 4 levels of listening, which for those of you who weren't with us on Monday is what we feel is probably the most important capability to be applied to both leading and operating in times of complexity and disruption. And there's materials about that on our website, Presencing Institute website. So And we're happy to share that. The need to pause before engaging in reactive response was definitely a theme we touched on. Someone said, I've taken the slow down measure. We talked about that, that impulse to react and respond to every new information that is coming our way, and how the discipline of really just stopping and holding the uncertainty in order to let our deeper sources of knowing and intuition and wisdom to emerge, both individually but also collectively in teams. Yes, that's, as Mike says, sustaining the not knowing before judgment. Great. Going into the gap. That was Martin told a story about Nelson Mandela, his response in a very, very tense time in South Africa, and how he, as Martin said, went into the gap, which was to not react and to go into a place of deep, deep stillness, actually, to know what was right, how to respond for his country in a time that could have been extremely explosive. So we'll invite you to keep adding more material here. Bronwyn, I think Bronwyn, I think you mentioned that these comments are going to be captured and saved and brought together in some way. So I'm not in all the detail, but I think there'll be a way that the forum shares some of this wisdom after the fact. So we'll share that with you in one way or another. So with that, we wanted to just maybe start with introducing Theory U, the general frameworks, and then we can have, we'll give some examples, and we can have some time then for questions and comments after that. So to introduce that, I'm going to turn it back to Martin now.
Becky, thank you very, very much, and colleagues, for recollecting together some of the reflections we made last time. For this session, we would like to, for some of you, introduce, for others, repeating the framework of Theory U. It comes from research work that colleagues at MIT, as Peter said, and as mentioned by Becky, working with others, going around the world, talking to people who had brought about profound change in their lives, in their organizations, in their communities, to try and pin down what it was that enabled them, the process they worked with in order to facilitate change. And it didn't really matter where these change makers, innovators were found. They seemed to describe the same journey. And interestingly, my own point of contact with Otto Sharma was when we met in South Africa. And I was describing to him some of my work and processes I've engaged in. And then he said, that is rhyming with what I have described as Theory U, or the U framework. You will notice, if you haven't done so already, that the U framework is a very natural way in which many people respond. They may not have named it that way, but in those moments when we have helped to bring about deep and profound change, in some form, we touched elements of that. So let me share the screen to show that framework. Okay. So it runs in this way. The three main movements of the U process are the following. But before I describe those three, the first thing we need to do is to stop downloading our patterns of the past. What comes in the way of us seeing the new is that we tend to repeat patterns of the past. We do this unconsciously. This skill we have naturally as humans, but we can easily lose it. It is what makes the difference between someone who simply sees the surface and another person who sees the deeper layers of the soil, the roots of a problem. We know that innovators, inventors, profound leaders who change society do not migrate to Mars, pick ideas, then they come to work with us on Earth. No, they live with us in the same towns, in the same villages and compounds, but somehow they have trained themselves to see deeper than the surface layer. They have learned to stop downloading patterns of the past so that they can attend to that which an average eye might be missing. So what are these three main movements? The first thing is that they tend to observe, observe, observe. It is the old story of what old anthropologists used to do. When they wanted to know a particular tribe community, they went and lived there. They didn't stand from outside to observe from within. And after observing, they try and avoid that thing which we learned mostly from some business schools, to get into brainstorming immediately. No. After observing, they tend to retreat in order to allow inner knowing to emerge. And as they are in that retreat mode, some insights somewhere here will appear. And when those insights occur, it's not the time to interrogate them. It is the time to act in an instant so that we can become wiser, not by debate, but by doing. We can then bring the rigor we know to interrogate the results of the prototype. So the three core movements of the U, after you have intentionally stopped downloading patterns of the past, are observe, observe, observe. Allow yourself moments to retreat so that you can allow inner, deeper knowing to emerge. And when insights occur to you, act in an instant. You will learn by reflecting on the actions you have taken and then make some changes, alterations. And as you repeat this process of acting, stopping to reflect, reshape what you acted upon, then you are likely to bring out the new. If you double click on these three movements, then you get the 5 core movements of the U process. So the first one is co-initiate. Look for people who are worried about the same issues as you are. Listen to others. Listen to yourself and what life calls you to do and to be in the world. Co-initiation is not about finding people who share the same answers with you. It is finding people who are bothered by the same questions. When I had the opportunity in Zambia to lead a process around how do we find an alternative way of responding to the HIV and AIDS pandemic, I looked for business people who were worried about the same issue. I looked for political leaders. One of the early politicians of our country, who was the first Minister of Finance, because of the credibility he held in society, offered to chair the process. He looked for, those of you who are interested in African football, Kalunga-Banda. He's the only footballer of the year from south of the equator. He was bothered by the same question. We looked for mining engineers, we looked for nurses and doctors, but we also looked for young people who were asking what future they were facing. The big deal in co-initiation is finding an eclectic, diverse group of people who are asking the same question. And when you have found one another, this is not the time to debate, to beat an idea purely by conversation. The next bit is to go out there, sense the field, so that, as I said earlier on, you can observe, observe, observe. You connect with diverse people and places so that you begin to understand the system from within, so that you can see the systemic forces that hold a particular challenge in place. In the first session, I shared about my time of working for my president, the third president of Zambia. When I had the chance to present before him a white paper, a new law to sign, a new policy to authorize, I would never simply put the paperwork before him. Before I did that, I would take him out so that he can experience what we have summarized, what we are about to present to him in form of law. On this material day, I learned that the following cabinet meeting was going to be about the growing armies of children whose parents have died from the HIV and AIDS pandemic. Fortuitously, in the same period of time, I had come to learn about an orphanage that had opened just 10 minutes away from the president's home and office. As I went to bid good night to the president, and it was the end of the week, on Friday, I asked the president, Your Excellency, any chance you'd spare some time to go and visit an orphanage? The president looked at me with disbelief. Martin, is that really a good use of presidential time? I knew he had a point, but I also wanted him to go and visit the children. I insisted that it was this time I was going to ask him to do that. And then he gave me a directive, exactly 30 minutes, get me out of there. The following day, in a small motorcade, we found our way to the orphanage. Typical African style, children were singing and dancing for the visiting head of state. In no time, he sat in a circle with the children and he began to engage with them, telling them stories, hearing their stories. My job, as always, is to sit behind him so that I could pass notes to him. 15 minutes down the line, I wrote on a piece of paper, 15 minutes to go. He looked at the piece of paper, crumpled it, gave it back to me without looking at me. He kept chatting with the children. As per tradition, 5 minutes before time, you need to help him remind him so that he begin to wind down his interaction. I wrote 5 minutes to go. Looked at the piece of paper again, crumpled it without looking at me, gave it back to me. It continued engaging. It's 30 minutes. It doesn't look like he's going to slow down. I make a judgment call. I could give him an extra 10 minutes. 40 minutes since we arrived, I wrote in big letters, we are 10 minutes behind schedule, Your Excellency. This time he doesn't crumple the piece of paper. In full view of everyone, he looks at me and screams, Martin, what's the problem with you? I'm talking to children and you are hurrying me out. If you have worked in government at that point, you have lost all authority as his helper. He is now in presidential time. We were leaving the orphanage 2 hours later. And as we were scampering to our vehicles, he commanded, Martin, come into my car. Before I could even buckle myself in the seat, he screamed again, come on, Martin, what's this? For the 3 years that I've been head of state, we haven't talked about those children. What kind of country are we running if those don't feature in our cabinet meetings? At that point, I knew that I had communicated to my head of state. The following Monday was a completely different cabinet meeting. He had seen them, he had touched them. They do exist. They are not simply statistics. They are in flesh and blood, real. So when we disengage ourselves from sensing the field and continue making decisions on the basis of what we get on our laptop and on our tablets and our phones, we disconnect with one source of inspiration. We disconnect with one source of creativity, the ability to connect with reality as it is. And we can easily fail to connect with reality if we do not switch on 3 faculties of intelligence. Becky mentioned these when she talked about listening last time. We humans, at the very least, think with 3 faculties, but they are much more than that. It's the open mind, open heart, and open will. When we do not learn how to suspend our voice of judgment, we block the intelligence of the open mind. What is the antidote to judgment? It is when we have the ability to work with curiosity. When we don't function from an open heart, it is because we are allowing cynicism to take over. Cynicism is close to judgment, but fundamental disbelief in what might be possible, but not familiar to us. What comes in the way of the open will is the voice of fear. We need to learn how to let go fear so that we can experiment, so that we can try new ways of thinking and doing things. After we have observed, the third movement in the framework is co-inspiring, the ability to retreat, as I said earlier on, so that we can tap into our deepest source of inspiration. And 2 questions are at the root of that. And these are, who is myself and what is my work? Who is myself with capital S? My best version of me, or the better version of me, when I'm not petty, when I'm not putting myself at the center of things. And what is my work is not about my job description, it's about purpose. What is mine to do? What am I here on earth for? And all of us can find that. When we connect with that, we begin to see that we are open to new ideas, new possibilities. We free our capacity to tap into all forms of possibilities. And that's when we experience insights occurring to us at an individual and collective levels. And when we get those insights, as I said earlier on, co-create prototypes with other people, act in an instant, so that you can truly live by one of the assumptions that there are moments when our hands are wiser than our heads can be. And as we review each of the prototypes, we begin to see elements that are working. And those are the ones we institutionalize, we embed in the wider system. That way, then we can bring about profound systems change without wasting a lot of resources through pilot projects, which we tend to announce even before we have experimented with them. And when they fail, in order to save face, we tend to fidget with the data we are getting. Co-initiate by finding people who can share, who share in the questions that truly matter. Go out and sense the field so that you can know the systemic forces of a challenge. And after you have sensed the field, retreat so that you can allow inner knowing to emerge. Ask yourself 2 root questions. Who is myself with capital S? And what is my work with capital W? And when you get an insight, don't beat it with mere interrogation and debate. Quickly implement it. Act in an instant so that you learn by doing rather than debate. And as you look at what has emerged from your action, apply all the rigor you know about a project working, an idea being tried out, and what is working. Then try and move it to a process where you institutionalize it. These are the 5 core movements here, because at each of these stages, there is a you going on. As you co-initiate, you move through the 5 movements. As you co-sense, you move through the 5 movements. So it is not as linear as my description puts it. And there are times when you have to go back to co-initiate because you have found out as you are co-sensing that certain people who should have been part of the dialogue, part of the learning journey, are not there. I will stop here so that Becky can send us into small group conversations.
I think Martin will. We're going to do one more story, and then we'll do the groups. If that sounds.
Yeah. No, that's the process. Yeah. Thank you.
Is okay. Yeah. So thank you, Martin. And as some people said in the chat, these are stories of change, and part of the art is telling how to tell the story. So thank you for your. Martin is a master storyteller, so do follow other events Martin's doing because he has loads more in his pocket to share. So we wanted to just share one more example of how we've applied this process that Martin describes in different contexts. So I was going to just share with you an example of a work we did with the UN in Cambodia last year, about 1.5 years ago. And just in terms of the sort of the context of that, the UN at that time, this is sort of late 2018, was embarking on 2 major change processes. So one was around system reform. So Secretary General Gutierrez had announced a whole very ambitious reform process in the UN, where that demanded of the teams across the system to work in a much more collaborative manner as one UN. So a hugely challenging process due to historic reasons, structural reasons, cultural reasons about, how do you get very, very different agencies to work together when even the sort of administrative infrastructure doesn't exist to do that. And the second huge challenge was around delivering on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So the Sustainable Development Goals being a major scaling up of ambition for the global community to address some of the huge challenges we're facing economically, socially, environmentally across the world. So a clear agenda, but also a general sense within the system that this agenda would absolutely require a new approach, that this could not, the combination of reform and SDGs could not be accomplished with the same methods. So we were invited in to work with a group within the Secretary General's office to pilot some approaches. And actually, Martin and I worked together on this. He led a pilot in Uganda, and I was working on a pilot with a team in Cambodia. And over a 5-month period, we brought them through a U process. So I put together some images just so you can get sort of a feel of how it all sort of unfolded over the course of about a 5-month period. So this is just the kind of design they came up with for the process, but we started with a co-initiation process, as Martin described, where we brought together the different stakeholders. In this case, it was the heads of each of the agencies. Cambodia is one of the countries that has most UN agencies working within it, so it was something like, I think, 18 different agencies that were working in country, each within their own mandates and quite siloed. So we spent quite a bit of time preparing the ground before we even launched the lab. We did this with interviews with all the participants. We synthesized that, brought people together, and we did an initial webinar where we really had to kind of get people in the room, just mentally and in terms of shared ambition for the process. So that co-initiation stage was very important. In the co-sense, so we had a first workshop where we got into this sort of co-sensing stage, sorry. And we did that in a way. Martin talked about going out and doing visits into communities. You can also do this through various techniques. Because we only had a few days together, we did 3D mapping, which some of you would have done before. So essentially drawing out the system so that people can start to visualize what is happening within the system, and start to identify both the key points of challenge, but also the key leverage points for change. I just need to check, Martin, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. So this is just a couple of people, a couple of groups. This woman on the right is the resident coordinator for the whole UN system in Cambodia. Everybody one of the things that happens with these processes is everybody sort of forgets their business cards and their rank, and it becomes a very creative process to really work together in identifying areas of potential. That's in the co-sensing where we did the mapping and started to identify points for potential leverage. And then the point of co-inspiring and presencing that Martin described, that retreat and reflect, the impulse is to move directly from this kind of mapping into, okay, what do we do about it? And with a group like this, I mean, as a facilitator and as a leader, the retreat and reflect part is maybe, the scariest point. Like, can you actually get a group like this to stop, to breathe, to be in silence together, and to go through some exercises where they have to really access their deeper sense of intuition and thinking. And I put this slide of our colleague Manish because he was my co-facilitator in this, and he's a very experienced meditation practitioner, and he was very, very good at bringing this group from a point of really getting out of their heads to connecting with their hearts. What is it that Cambodia requires of us? And I thought Martin's 2 questions are so important, which is, who is myself and what is my work? That isn't about job description. That is about connecting with what I'm most deeply called to do. And one of the things that I've always found very powerful in this is something that Otto Scharmer said to me when I worked at Oxfam. So I worked at Oxfam for many years, and I had been there for a long time and was, at that stage of feeling quite burnt out by the whole thing. And he said, think of it this way: you don't work for Oxfam, you work from Oxfam. And that just shifted things for me. And it was really about you know, you are in a privileged position wherever you sit in the system to be able to leverage that institution for the work that needs to be done in the world. And so in a way, in Cambodia, that's what we were asking people to do. You don't work for UNICEF, you work from UNICEF. So what are you going to do with that? And people really, really experienced some profound shifts in that. We then moved into the co-creating stage, and we go through a whole process around identifying areas of potential and prototyping. These were just, I pulled up some of the stickies that people came up with around different prototypes that they wanted to work with. And what happened in the process is, as Martin said, you go through sort of various repetitions of the U. After this, they went out and did sensing journeys out in the communities. And what they came up with as a group was that the kind of binding theme for them across all of their work was the need to engage and involve youth in all the work across all the SDGs. And that became the unifying factor. So when they moved into co-creating, they created a whole range of new experiences and ways of engaging across the UN agencies, which was based on the future generations for Cambodia. And in terms of the co-evolving stage, that became their expression of one UN, is if we all join our efforts to make sure that young people who are over 50% of the population in Cambodia have a real voice in the future of the UN, and what it's doing in the community is what we can do together. So I just, I ended with 2 slides. This was kind of at the beginning of the workshop, and everybody's wearing these shirts because it was the Global Day to End Violence Against Women. And it was all the UN officials standing and doing their, you know, their wave to the group. This was the final day of the 2nd or 3rd workshop, in which the people who are sitting in the front are all young leaders from Cambodia, and the resident representative is sort of sitting on the floor with them, along with some of the other UN leaders. And I just thought it was a great reflection of how they flipped the UN on its head and brought the young people in, and they all united around this common purpose. So that was the example I wanted to share with you. And with that, we wanted to really open up to you to have a bit of a conversation about how these frameworks help you to think about the leadership required for these times. And we were going to do that by putting you for just a short amount of time into discussion groups. So what we'll do is put you in groups of 3 to 4. I'm just going to put the question here in the chat. So if in your groups, you can just briefly introduce yourselves, your name, your location, your organization or work, and then just reflections. What reflections did you have from hearing these stories of change? And secondly, what does that say about what is required to lead in times of disruption? So we'll put you into groups, and you'll have about between 15, 20 minutes, and we'll give you a few minutes warning before we're bringing you back. And if you can just discuss these questions, and then we'll bring you back and hear reflections back from the group. So I'm going to ask Lydia. Oh, Lydia's already setting it up. Thank you. Martin, do you want to reflect at all on the introvert-extrovert phenomenon?
I can only express an opinion and some experience of facilitating processes such as the one you, Becky, and I are describing. So in the co-initiation phase, we need to pay attention to diversity. If you can, multi-stakeholder, cross-sectoral, and looking for the different qualities and ways of showing up that can truly bring value to one another. And when you begin the sensing phase, one of the magical questions I found or I work with, whoever I finish speaking to, learning from, the last question I ask, who else do you think we should be talking to if we really want to understand this? And quite often, Steve, in the community, there is someone who knows the other person, the other group, the other community that is not as vocal as those that you often tend to know. Pay attention to that. If you work at the local level, you will pick those who really know what and have experienced what in the system. It is, as someone said earlier on, those of us who dive from abroad into places that we want to help under the banner of development. It is when you, as a helper, focus on process, the knowledge and expertise will be supplied by the people on the ground. Becky, that's all I wanted to share about that. I'm sure you have your own reflections on this.
Well, no, I thought that was great, and I think I was going to actually jump to a different comment that someone made about how the framework sort of shifts the whole notion of who are the experts, and a bit related to what Stephanie said also about shifting the paradigm around development, which is that the experts are the people who are experiencing the system in all its dysfunction. So what some of that, particularly that co-sensing, but also the prototyping stage help to do is to take the experts out of the center of the picture. And there's need for expertise, but the technical expertise is as no more or no less important than the lived experience of the people who are experiencing the system that we're trying to engage with. So getting that shift and working with experts is interesting. I recently was working with one of the autonomous regions in Ecuador, and it was a planning process that was planned around a group of expert planners going to essentially develop the plan for this area. And process just served so powerfully to help them start the process in a different way. We did a lot of the investment in the co-sensing, where we brought them out into sensing journeys with the communities, where we had done a lot of preparation about suspending judgment and suspending opinion and suspending expertise to truly listen to people. And it completely changed the way they thought about the process they were going to engage in. And I think in a way it was a relief to them too, when you don't have to be the expert. All you have to be expert in is listening, actually. And that then the solutions from the communities will come forward if you create the space for that. So I like that, what somebody said there about reversing the role of the experts. Lots of people are putting up their LinkedIn contacts. We'll come back to that at the end. Martin, one other, just where we're sort of coming towards the end of the time, there was one other question in the chat, which was about examples of co-creation. In that kind of co-creation stage, can you give an example? And I wonder if with some of the work you did on the HIV work in Namibia, you could describe a little bit that part of the process, what actually happened and what came out of that.
Thank you. So some years back, the then Prime Minister of Namibia, Nahas Angula, had a question that was bothering him. He kept asking the question, what would be my legacy? And then fortuitously was approached by SNEGOS, an organization within Namibia that had been doing some small studies around maternal health. And when they discussed with him what the results were, so many women and children dying in childbirth, he immediately found what his calling was. Collaborating with other people, we were invited as Presencing Institute to support the transformation of the Namibia healthcare system. I do remember when they asked us, who should we have on this journey to transform the Namibia healthcare system? And we said to them, don't ignore the traditional birth attendant. They have been helping mothers to give birth for hundreds of years, and they have received a lot of knowledge in practice. Don't forget the young women who are forced into pregnancy at an early age of 16, 17, because they have stories that can teach us a lot. Then the conventional medical doctor. And in Namibia, you can't do anything if you ignore the mining industry. They are an incredible part of not only the economy of Namibia, but also the country as a whole. So we gathered together an eclectic group of people, and we never stopped asking who else should be there. And then, together with the Minister for Health, all the senior bureaucrats and ordinary people that were a part of the journey, for months, we went out sensing. But what hit us within the first 2-3 days made us realize, while the journey of transformation is long, opportunities for system shifting can appear immediately. And that's where, if we learn to suspend our usual patterns of seeing things, we can begin to push the boundaries of transformation quite early on. So we started seeing the behavior of ambulance drivers that discouraged pregnant women from getting on the ambulance to go for antenatal clinic. We started seeing the relationship between people who never linked themselves to the deaths of pregnant women and children in childbirth begin to connect their behavior with those deaths. And those were low-lying fruits, but high impact when we corrected them, when we attended them, when we helped drivers see that they were part of healers. They were not just people who moved this thing called a vehicle. When those behaviors started shifting quite early on in the process, we started seeing major changes. But then the longer-term aspects were about, how do you train nurses in a country which has 40-50% short of nurses that are needed? Before you coordinate with the training institutions, can you think of another way? So in one prototyping process, they thought about inversing the process of training nurses. Begin with issues to do with maternal health, so that students within the first 6 to 9 months can begin to be valuable to the systems and communities in which they live. Although the journey took longer than we had assumed, way beyond 4 years, the results started appearing within the first month, because officials started asking themselves the question, if I am a senior official in the Ministry of Health and my wife, I would never take her to a public hospital or clinic to be attended to when she's in the motherly way, what does that say about the institution I'm superintending? Just by virtue of them asking themselves those questions, we had begun to perturb the system. We had begun to shift the system. So transformation journeys tend to be long, but the results need not be delayed, all of them, until 2-3 years later. If you are paying attention to co-initiating, stopping to observe, go and sense the field, there will be low-lying fruits that allow you to move through the U almost at supersonic speed. Sometimes it's just shifting the thinking and behavior of those with power and influence, and then changes begin to occur. May not have answered the question, but I thought the experience of the Namibia healthcare system could be of interest.
Thanks, Martin. We're really starting to come to the end of our time together. Just if there's any other comments, the chat has lots of really rich material in it. And if you want to save it yourself, you can just click the little 3 buttons that are on the bottom of the chat there, and it says save chat. So you can save that, especially because lots of people are sharing their LinkedIn links there. And just maybe finally to say, when we started talking about this session, really back in November, December, and we thought it would be interesting to do a program with the Skoll Center on leading in disruptive times. And that was before we had any notion of the reality we would find ourselves in now. And it's really been quite moving, actually, to show up for this session now when there's so much going on within our families, within our organizations, within our communities and societies that really call on all of us to be leaders in different ways and to apply some of these tools I have found very helpful, and we hope you have found helpful also, just as a way to reflect on how we show up for the crisis that we're in now and what that means about what we're creating in the future. So with that, just we'll say goodbye with just a few logistical things, and I'll turn it back to you, Martin, and then Bronwyn, if you want to close. For the Presencing Institute, we've had to, like everyone, cancel virtually all of our in-person sessions. We've moved everything onto online. Today we're launching this U Academy, which is offering 4 programs that are coming up over the coming 3-4 months. We also have this, these are programs that you can subscribe to and join. They have a small cost to them, all done online. We're also launching an online community and discussion space called Gaia, which some of you may already be part of. That's free of charge and it's open to everyone. It's in multi-languages and it's a really, really exciting creative space. So if you go on our general website, which I'll put here, and look for Gaia, you'll see how that's taking shape over the coming weeks. And with that, I'll just give my personal thanks. And then Martin, if you want to say goodbye and pass it to Bronwyn. And just before I sign off, Bronwyn, people are wondering about recording. So if you could let people know about that when you say goodbye. But thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the Skoll Forum here online. Over to you, Martin.
Just to say thank you very much, everyone, for joining this dialogue, and I hope we can continue in one form or the other through the Skoll Center at Oxford Side Business School. Let's continue the conversation. Bronwyn.
Thank you, Martin. Hello, everybody. My name is Bronwyn, and I'm a program manager at the Skoll Center. And I would just really like to sincerely thank the Presencing Institute for your partnership on this session, particularly for the stories that you've told today, really making a lot of the theory you really come to life. And I know that was really, really instrumental in me understanding the actual theory itself. So thank you so much. I think it's just wonderful to be able to engage in this content around bending the beam of observation on ourselves to really understand systems change. And I think that's really important. I'd also just like to thank the Skoll team for all the work that you guys have done behind the scenes to make this up and running. And for Lydia Darley, she's been putting us in groups and bringing us back and doing all the logistics so beautifully and effortlessly. So thank you so much, Lydia. We look forward to continue to engage with all of you this week and beyond. So please do keep in touch with us. For the sessions of the Skoll World Forum, we have another session coming up later on this afternoon, and that will be at 4 o'clock British Summer Time. And that's really around using social listening to combat COVID-19. So please do tune in for that one. Tomorrow, we'll also have a session on mobilizing a movement of movements, and looking at tools for the road ahead. And then we'll also have the Skoll virtual award ceremony at 4 o'clock British Summer Time happening tomorrow as well. So we hope that you will join us for that. We ask that you continue to engage with us at the Skoll Center. We're looking forward to offering this Leading in Times of Disruption as a partnership with the Presencing Institute and the Skoll Center at the Said Business School, the University of Oxford. So please make sure that you sign up for our newsletter and continue to follow us. I'll ask Lydia to add some information in the chat for you. These sessions will be recorded. The presenters will be recorded as well as the presentation, and those will be available on the Skoll Forum website. We will also make sure that the information from the chat will be summarized and will be available to all of you as well on the Skoll Forum website. So, so you'll definitely be able to access this information at a later stage. Just in closing, for those of you who have worked with Theory U for a while, you'll remember this quote, and I think it's a really important moment in time to really focus on this, and it's by Buell, and many of you will know it. And it is, the success of an intervention often depends on the inner condition of the intervener. And I think at this time that we have right now to pause, it's an excellent opportunity for us to focus on our own inner conditions as leaders. So with that, we're going to end our session today. Thank you so much to everybody for joining. Stay safe, stay connected, and see you soon.